Last story of the day before we take a couple questions is over from New York. The New York Police Department is, they're probably a little bit upset right now because a new court ruling just came out and said that they are not allowed to bargain away, to negotiate away their obligation to disclose certain materials. So the way that this typically works, right? The police department, they know what officers have gotten in trouble. They are the only ones that really know. They're the police department. There's no typically, there's no real lists anywhere that we can all sort of just go check on officers. There are lists that prosecutors will provide periodically, but this is a problem that I've been talking about a long time on this channel. I've said repeatedly, police unions are a huge part of the problem because when they enter into negotiations with cities and say, hey, we're going to come and provide policing services for you, but we want these terms. We've got, 1,000 officers here who are part of our union. City council, if you want our services, well, we're going to have to enter into a pretty robust contract. And as part of that contract, we want to make sure that our officers and their prior records, their disciplinary proceedings, any of those, anything that they did bad in the past, we don't want that brought forward because, we got to protect our officers, right? We got to protect our police. They're good people, blah, blah, blah. Whatever their justification is for allowing bad, disciplined, sanctioned officers to continue being on the force, they've got a justification for it. I don't understand it at all, but they have it. And the city council just buckles for them. They just say, all right, well, how about 5 years? After 5 years, we're just going to scrub their records clean. They say, okay, no problem, cool. And we're going to go in there and then we're going to have a police force. That same situation happened here in Arizona. After 5 years, a lot of police departments, the Phoenix police, right, the biggest police department here in Arizona at least, was just scrubbing their records. So if you just made it past that hurdle, you were in the clear. Nobody would know about anything that you did prior to that. Awful. And then people wonder, Joe Biden wonders, why is this stuff such a problem throughout this country? Well, it might be the unions. And in New York, the unions suffered a massive defeat as a federal court said, you cannot do that anymore. You cannot continue to bargain away your constitutional duty under the Brady rules, Supreme Court precedent to disclose conduct, to disclose evidence of your own misconduct or malfeasance. This article came over from Law and Crime, written by Colin Kalmbacher yesterday, says unions representing the New York City Police Department officers were dealt a decisive loss in federal court on Tuesday after unsuccessfully suing to keep in place a regime of state secrecy that benefits law enforcement at the expense of public transparency. This happens everywhere. This case stems from a 2020 rollback of Section 50-A of New York State's civil rights law, a law which was used for decades by police departments across the Empire State to withhold individual police officers' disciplinary records from the press, even after officers had been credibly accused of bad behavior. This happens all the time. I complain about it. If you go back, months and months and months ago, I used to hold these officers' pictures up. Now we use PowerPoint. Hold them up and say, hey, remember this guy? Because the media wouldn't cover it. The police don't disclose their names. They don't tell us who they are. They just try to keep it all hush-hush. Meanwhile, many of these guys and gals are out there still being a part of law enforcement, still making arrests, still citing people, still prosecuting cases, even though they themselves are in trouble. They violated their own policies and procedures. But they do everything they can to sweep it under the rug. The reform-focused impetus behind revoking the statute was consistently stalled out under the administration of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo for several years, until a critical mass of support for striking down the law came after George Floyd. Right? So all of these jokers in our government who say that they are all about criminal justice reform, they're really sorry about George Floyd, they want to do better. Let's have a conversation, everybody. Let's just talk about it. Let's form a commission, Joe Biden. Let's have a lot of people just study this issue and take a look at it. Well, you've got some stuff that was already underway. Andrew Cuomo, you could have done something about this, but you didn't. You stalled it. Because it's all talk. There's no action from any of these people. Well, until George Floyd happened, now they are trying to do something about it. Once 50-A was off the books, New York City announced plans to, quote, proactively publish certain types of disciplinary records and provide other records upon request consistent with its obligations under the New York Freedom of Information Law. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals noted in a summary order several law enforcement unions sued to keep multiple forms of disclosures under wraps. Law enforcement unions sued to keep multiple forms of disclosures under wraps. So when people ask, what can we do to solve this Justice Department, this justice problem that we have, this criminal justice issue that we're seeing all over the country? And we talk about getting bad officers off the force. Why are they not going anywhere? Because of unions. And you see it right here. The unions are doing everything they can to keep those disclosures under wraps. They don't want you to know about it. In July and August of 2020, U.S. District Judge Catherine P. Fiala ruled against the unions. She ultimately denied the motion in substantial part, but granted police groups a narrow victory by enjoining a small subset of certain records from disciplinary trials where a police officer is determined to be not guilty. Right? I think that's pretty reasonable. Okay, if you're acquitted on that, if you've had a formal process, I, as a defense attorney, would still like to know that you had the proceeding. Remember, if you're charged with a crime, at least in Arizona and California, you can just go look up those records on the internet. You can go look up somebody's name and say, okay, I can see exactly what that person was charged with. And when they have court next, I can see who their attorney is. I can see what the charges are, how long the case has been going on. All of the stuff that we cover on this channel very regularly is just public records, whether it's Rittenhouse, whether it's the Floyd stuff. We've been following Derek Chauvin for some period of time. It's all public record. Unless you're a cop, okay? If you're a citizen, then it just goes behind the scenes. Unless you're a cop like Derek Chauvin, who's been arrested, national media. Right now, he's the subject of an entire inquiry. He's been charged with a crime, so his records will also be public. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the police misconduct. When the police violate their own protocols, they're a part of the government. When they go through their due process, it's all kept behind closed doors. All these little, subcommittees here and there, and they all just kind of keep things secret, but we can't see any of it. But if you get in trouble, it's front and center. In fact, they may even put your mugshot on the internet. Just for good measure, just to rub it in. But if a cop gets in trouble, not so much. Everything gets swept under the rug. The NYPD and others had argued that they would be irreparably harmed by the release of such records. Okay, but both the lower court and the second court found that line of argument unpersuasive. The unions assert that law enforcement officers will have fewer employment opportunities in the future if records of the allegations against them that prove to be unfounded or unsubstantiated are disclosed, even though each record will reveal the outcome of the investigations, the appeals court said. Okay. But the district court noted that future employers were unlikely to be misled by conduct records that contained dispositional designations specifying that allegations of misconduct were unsubstantiated, unfounded, or that the accused officer was exonerated. Right? Just like anything else. You can do that. If you've been charged with a crime and they find that on your background record and you walk right in and you say, yeah, I was charged with that. Here's my dismissal notice. Okay, I was adjudicated and found not guilty. What other questions do you have about it? I'm happy to talk about it. It was bogus. It was an unlawful charge. I beat it. And everybody should go. I mean, in my opinion, I'd say, okay, good. It's great. Happy for you. Thank you for clearing that up. Apparently, that's outside of the scope of what the police are allowed to do, what they can do. The panel went on to note that numerous other states make similar records available to the public and ultimately found that, quote, the unions have pointed to no evidence from any jurisdiction that the availability of such records resulted in harm to employment opportunities. NYPD also lodged a more general grievance against transparency, arguing that the release of disciplinary records would result in heightened danger and safety risks to police officers. What? The court dismissed those as wholly unfounded as well. We fully and unequivocally respect the dangers and risks police officers face every day, but we cannot say that the district court abused its discretion when it determined that the unions have not sufficiently demonstrated that those dangers and risks are likely to increase because of the city's planned disclosures. In arriving at that conclusion, we note again that many other states make similar misconduct records at least partially available to the public without any evidence of a resulting increase of danger to police officers. Yeah, it's because it's not more dangerous to them. How is it more dangerous to them? Okay, they have all of the records, folks. They have them. We don't get them. They're in control of it. They investigate themselves. Most of the time they find that they did nothing wrong and everything's fine, everything's good. But if you're charged with a crime, if you're a defendant, if you're somebody that this government is coming after you for, wouldn't you want to know whether that officer who just pulled you over and charged you with the DUI, whether a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whether he did something similar, whether he was inappropriate with somebody on the side of the road, whether he's got a history, racial profiling, whether he's broken policies before. This is a huge one. What if a police officer breaks a policy? Okay. They have a procedure in place and they break that. that opens the door to a lot of problems in any criminal case. If they're going to break a policy on something stupid, well, then why wouldn't they break a policy when they're analyzing your blood sample or drawing it out of your body, or when they're testifying under oath that they saw you violate a law on the road and that was their justification in order to pull you over? And then they make up something else about smelling something on your breath. Boom, that leads them to probable cause. They ask you out of the car, field sobriety test, more probable cause, arrest, take you to jail. Now you get charged with a DUI. Well, what if that officer has already broken policies? What if that officer already has a history of malfeasance, of lying, of bending the truth? And we as defense attorneys can't see that. We just don't, it's not anywhere to be found because it's not publicly available. Well, fortunately, the Second Circuit sounds like they have helped clear some of that up for these people out of New York. This is the final summary order that you'll see here. Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Appeal from an order is affirmed. So that's good news. Little good news here today. A lot of terrible criminal justice news today, but that was a good one.